Hello. Last time we met, we talked about Paleozoic events. So remember that the continents were different during the Paleozoic. Two of the continents that existed were Laurentia, which now includes North America, and Gondwana, which was made up of all of the continents in the Southern Hemisphere plus India. Gondwana was on the South Pole, which allowed for a lot of ice accumulation and several ice ages. Laurentia was on the equator. So where we live in North America, it was actually a more tropical climate. Right? During this time, we saw the rise of the Cordilleran mountain belt on Laurentia's west coast, the rise of the Appalachian mountain belt on our coast when Pangaea came together, when Gondwana collided with Laurentia, creating Pangaea. During this time, the Appalachians were huge. They were brand new. They were the size of the Himalayan mountains. Since then, they've eroded much farther down, right? So that was a quick recap of what we saw in terms of events during the Paleozoic. This time, we're going to look at life and evolution and the animals and plants that were evolving and proliferating and sometimes going extinct during that same time. All right, here we go. So Paleozoic life, right? To remind you, the Paleozoic era is part of the Phanerozoic eon, which is the modern eon that we live in right now. The Paleozoic era was the first era of this eon. It was the time before the dinosaurs. So Paleozoic means ancient life, right? Some of the first life on Earth. Not the first, but it's when life started proliferating, becoming more what we know it today. Right. So this is our timeline that we're going to be working through today. Notice we are going to start in the Cambrian at the very beginning of the Paleozoic, experience the Cambrian explosion, and then work forward through time. We're going to experience the rise of fishes, the rise of amphibians, the rise of reptiles, not making it to mammals yet, but getting close. All right, so during the early Paleozoic, animals with shells proliferated. They became very, very common. Remember that before the Paleozoic and the Precambrian, the creatures were marine and they were soft-bodied, right? So think like sponges and things like that. So they were very rarely preserved. It wasn't until these small shelly fossils became a lot more common that they became preserved as fossils more commonly. And so we have much more evidence of these organisms. Okay. Now, in the Cambrian, there was an explosion of life. Right? We know this because we find the fossils, and we find the fossils in we find the fossils all over the world, but there are two places on Earth that are really remarkable at preserving the fossils for us to come find. One is in British Columbia, and the other one is in China. And both of these places reveal that seas during the Cambrian were just teeming with a huge diversity of marine animal life, right? So this awakening of this huge diversity, this evolution of this huge diversity of animal life, we call the Cambrian explosion of life. During this explosion of life, all principal invertebrate phyla, except for Bryozoa, evolved, right? So this was really the start of the phylogenetic tree that would produce the animals that we know of today, right? Now, why might this explosion have occurred? There's lots of reasons. We think it was probably a combination of factors. One was that there was more beneficial climate conditions. Two was that during this time, the atmosphere developed an ozone layer, which protected the animal life from harmful incoming solar radiation. We also think because there was more oxygen in the atmosphere, this allowed animals to grow and proliferate. Another reason is that because there was new niches to take over. So right before the early Cambrian, the Precambrian organisms, many of those went extinct for a variety of reasons, but we think one of the big ones was that predators developed and they were just eaten into extinction, right? But as those Precambrian, those Ediacaran biota went extinct, that allowed open space, new niches, new roles for the Cambrian explosion animals to grow into, to evolve into. One more big reason that we think the Cambrian explosion occurred is because of Hox genes. Now remember that genes are what is passed down from parent to child, parent to offspring. And these Hox genes were a special kind of genes that control body patterns, body structure. So it controls where your head is in relationship to your torso, how many fingers you have, what orientation they grow in, right? The body patterns, those are controlled by Hox genes, which means that very small changes in these Hox genes can have very important impacts on the structure of the organism, right? So small changes in Hox genes can create a long, skinny fin on a fish, or a wide, flat fin on a fish, or a fin on a fish that kind of starts to look like a foot, and then even a foot, right? For a land animal, like a tetrapod, an animal with 4 limbs. Right. So the development and the slight changes in these Hox genes allowed the Cambrian explosion to occur because there were a lot of different body patterns, body forms, different shapes, different sizes of bodies developing during this time.